Hello, I'm Eric Walenza, founder of IoT One, and this is the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Every episode, I interview one expert about a project that is impacting businesses today. Visit us at iot1.com to learn more, or email me to start a discussion. Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight. I'm joined today by Bay McLaughlin, CEO and founder of Brinc.io. Brinc is a rather interesting company for me. It's a bit of a different space than the typical company that you'll see featured on the IoT Spotlight, in that Brinc is not a technology provider in themselves, but they help bring technologies to market. A bit of overview. Brinc is based in Hong Kong. They're also operational in Guangzhou, China, which for those of you who are unfamiliar, Guangzhou is the manufacturing base in southern China where most of our electronics come from globally. They're also active in the UK and now in the Middle East. Brinc is basically an ultra hands-on hardware accelerator. They help entrepreneurs unlock data through connected solutions, and they basically help companies, young companies, walk through the process of validating a solution, bringing it through the manufacturing process, which is a well-noted valley of death for many hardware companies, and finally bringing it to market. Bay, what did I miss in my overview of Brinc that's important to note before we kick off our discussion?
Probably just two quick things. Nice to see everyone, talk to everyone, meet everyone. Thanks for having me. The first one is Guangzhou is the bookend to Hong Kong, or the PRD, or the Pearl River Delta. Now that's where all the manufacturing and electronics development happens. We used to have our main offices in Shenzhen, which everyone knows that city's name. However, we decided it makes more sense just to be in the factory, so not sitting in an office behind the firewall. So that's the one clarification. Only other one is the ultra hands-on accelerator. While we do have ultra hands-on accelerators, that's where we started 2.5 years ago. We're actually more of an IoT or hardware lifecycle now, where we support hardware entrepreneurship at every stage of the lifecycle, and the ultra hands-on accelerator is just one part of what we do now.
Great. And the topic we're going to be talking about today is this lifecycle platform, is basically a walkthrough what it takes to take a product through the process from ideation through mass production and to market. Bay, maybe you can ground us a little bit. Which type of companies are you working with? B2B, B2C, are there particular industries? What is a typical company that would be coming through your program?
Well, in the accelerator, it generally ends up being consumer and B2B2C. We do have a couple of B2B applications in the drone space, but normally we'll see teams apply that end up having to deal with the customer experience, not, let's say, a sensor that sits in the bottom of a car or a boat or a container ship or whatever. So not that we're opposed to that. However, a lot of our educational content, a lot of our distribution experience and power ends up dealing with some of the consumer distribution channels out there. But we are slowly expanding the pure B2B side. But it's all good. We're open to working and supporting any person that's working to do physical innovation. So if it's not connected, it generally won't make sense for the accelerator, because having equity in companies, generally speaking, when you're looking at a VC perspective, we're looking for the data to be quite valuable and have a scalable or sort of outsized exit. But our Enter China community, our distribution channels, our studio in China to help do production manufacturing works with teams that don't have connected technologies all the time, because there's still amazing work to be done just in basic physical innovation, even if it's not connected.
Gotcha. And just to make this a little bit more concrete, before we kick off our discussion of the path to market, can you give me a couple examples of companies that have come through your platform? Just what technology were they developing? What markets are they serving?
Sure. So on a pure B2C play, one of our first investments is a company called Soundbrenner. It's a platform for rhythm education. So that could be professional musicians, students learning, or prosumers. That's very common electronic technologies, motors, haptic engines, vibration algorithms, and basic sort of accelerometer, Bluetooth, all the kind of normal stuff you'd be able to find in electronics market. And then we've got other devices like Pill Drill, which is a B2B2C and B2C option, which allows people to really stick to their medical adherence schedules. So that could be the elderly, someone with some sort of disease, or someone that just wants to take their vitamins like me but that is sold on CVS.com and also has a lot of large B2B2C distribution options. So those are some of the kind of consumer plays. On the kind of more B2B focus, or even some of the software and algorithm sides, we have some really cool technologies in the drone space. So we have stuff like plantation mapping and disease review from the sky. We've got applications in drones that actually help survey planes when they land and detect micro tears or issues or malfunctions on a plane to speed up the return of the plane to flight, and all sorts of other cool stuff. But we also have some nanotechnology out of Russia. You name it, we probably played with it.
All right. Nice and broad. How do you find these companies? Are they generally finding you, or are you scouting out and identifying good teams and inviting them into the program?
You mean both, obviously. I was in the Valley for almost 10 years. Hillary, our head of program, she was in London working for Seed Camp, a similar time frame, which is the largest accelerator program across Europe. So we definitely have some good mapping done in terms of the geographies where we source a lot of our teams from. I'd say we've got right now about I think it's 12 or 13 different countries represented in our current portfolio, with applications from over 36 countries. So we're quite global by definition. We don't have requirements for teams to physically come to our one location. We can do in person, we can do online, or both. We definitely have a bias that the best talent isn't necessarily sitting in San Francisco. Sorry, Bay Area, I love you, but I was there for a decade. It's just not true. Similar to kind of the other massive hubs, there's really awesome talent all over the planet.
So let's kick off. So what we're going to talk about today is the life cycle platform that Brinc has built up, breaking it into these four elements. So first, entering China, taking a company through the early incubation, the ideation phase, validating that there is a solution. Second, accelerating, taking it from an idea to a prototype, building out the business model. Third, bringing the team to China, to the China studio, developing a proper design for manufacturing so that we're able to scale up manufacturing cost effectively. And again, this is a very significant challenge for hardware startups. And then fourth, bringing it to market, so distribution and sales. First stage, early incubation, how does that work? Give us a high-level overview of how a company would enter into that, and then what are they trying to get out of this?
Sure. So this is actually something that we had to learn the hard way. So we started out with just our accelerator, but then unfortunately we realized that there's so many teams that have fantastic ideas, but they just need some time to sort of incubate or work on the idea a little bit. And unfortunately, because I'm sure as anyone that's ever joined an accelerator, applied, or ever even thought about an accelerator recognizes, it's very challenging to be a perfect fit at that right moment in time when we have applications open, the program's just about to start, all the different requirements. It's quite specific. And so we were getting frustrated that we've met so many great founders, both in our roadshows as we travel all around the world, online as they connect to us, all the events we throw. And so we figured we've got to solve this problem. And there's just really great founders that aren't getting the help they need. So we ended up actually acquiring a company called Enter China. You can check it out. It's enterchina.co. And you can go /BetaBay, which is my handle. And if you sign up with BetaBay, you actually will get a free office hour with me personally, as well as there's some other cool benefits like office space in our locations, discount on our other services, etc. But the reason I bring that up is entering China is not specifically about just coming to China. Obviously, if you're going to be doing something at scale in the physical world, it's fairly likely you're either going to source from the supply chain in the PRD, or you might actually do assembly, and packaging and everything here too, although not necessarily. A lot of people are manufacturing all over the world, but generally speaking, they're sourcing their supplies and components from the PRD or South China. So you can join that. It's a paid membership. You can join one of the webinars, learn more about it. It's an amazing platform with online content that's been developed. I actually went through a lot of this content word for word and learned a ton before I made my transition from being a digital entrepreneur in the Valley for 10 years and now moving into physical in Asia the last 3 years. So I'm a byproduct of having used this platform. But it's also an online community and WeChat group that blows up with great messages all day long, master classes, meetups, and a Facebook community to document. So just today, I've been on 4 separate threads helping people deal with 3D printing, for 20 to 40 high fidelity prototypes in China, shipping back to Austin, Texas. And also we've been talking about the differences in being an online Amazon retailer and small business versus becoming an OEM or sort of trade-based business. there's so much knowledge in those 300 online entrepreneurs. They've got 200 years experience and they've shipped 6 million units. I've really been excited about this acquisition because it's a way for us to finally support a lot more entrepreneurs that may not fit our perfect, moment in time for the accelerator, our studio, or distribution.
Great. So this is also a great way for you, absolutely, to branch out and address a much wider audience, and a more diverse audience. Is there a start to stop to this? Is there a decision point where a company enters in and decides either they're going to go ahead or, for whatever reason, the business model, the product, they've decided not to pursue a project? Or is this more of an educational platform where you don't necessarily have that visibility into why a company that enters into China might continue or discontinue?
Well, it's been really fascinating. I mean, so we actually have guys that have moved to China, opened their own factories that clearly are not like, they can't benefit but so much, right? Like we're not there to let people source work from the teams. They're not there to be sold stuff. They're there to learn and get the resources they need. But we literally have one of our, friends who owns a factory in China, who's a foreigner, who literally chimes in all day long and just helps people. It's crazy. Like, you wouldn't think that he would need help on that. But he just a couple of days ago, he was showing people how to spot fakes in doing their analysis and all this stuff and setting up photos and like really hands-on and supportive. What we do find is that most people that join, I'd say the large majority are actually trying to figure out and validate whether they have a good idea on their hands and then how to actually make this a profitable business. Some join just to learn, and obviously some will join, try and realize like maybe they're going down the wrong path and this isn't for them. And that's important for us too. Like we do our very best at Brinc to give feedback. We definitely think that's a gift. Even teams that we decide to reject for our accelerator or other programs, we give as much feedback as humanly possible because we know this game is really hard and it can be profoundly transformative for the right mindset and the right person. But for someone who really doesn't know what they're getting into, it could actually be a pretty hard slog because it's not a simple business to build. But it's really cool, man. We have guys, not joking, we have so many examples of people that come in with an idea that have gotten to $100,000 income, and we have multiple experiences. We're actually having to branch out and create subgroups in the group of people that have made millions and people that have made tens of millions, which is kind of awesome and crazy. So it's just people are there, and they generally are trying to get feedback on how to test whether their idea is reasonable. And they're actually going through that grind of doing customer interviews, doing polls, doing online advertising, testing pricing, like doing all the really cool hard work that you need to do to determine if you should really move into launching the product, joining an accelerator, taking investment, or ending up manufacturing. I think that kind of early customer discovery and development work gets overlooked quite often in the hype that is IoT.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Super, super essential. And having that done on, you could say a community level scale where there can be sharing and it's not done in the isolation of an entrepreneur, in a cave kind of, I think that also provides a lot of value in terms of being able to kind of sense check your progress, your thoughts as you go. But let me ask, multinationals, I talk to a lot of companies that are, they're setting up their own incubators. I think there's a relatively low success rate. And I think one of the reasons is that, then you have a traditional company that maybe they identify 10 companies, they bring those companies in. The probability that one of those 10 companies is a good fit is relatively low. And then the probability that they, even if the company is, does have something tangible, that they're going to be able to integrate it into their culture, their product portfolio. Relatively low probability. I would see something like this as having value for both sides, where the multinational could potentially be one of the data points helping to validate whether a product is interesting, whether it addresses maybe one of the pain points that they have in their operation. But also I could see them being quite interested in having access to this community of entrepreneurs who are testing out and validating new ideas. How active are you seeing the multinational community in this activity or in your other activities working with early stage entrepreneurs?
Well, I think you're going to ask me later in the podcast about the future and whatever else. So I can allude to something that I can't talk too much about, but suffice it to say that we work very, very closely with quite a few multinationals. And that's for two main reasons. One that you hit on, which is probably the most obvious point, is they can validate whether this makes sense at a scale that they're looking at with the distribution channels and the customers that they have. Obviously, the startup does not have that purview. Now, that's something that a lot of founders don't like to hear. I mean, these are basic kind of hard lessons learned, like I want to make a product. It does the following things. crowdfunding told me it's cool, or, one customer told me that's fine, but they didn't validate that the market's actually going to manage that price point or can handle that price point. And that's something that a multinational can do quite well. They can see through so many distribution channels across so many customer segments and give you a really good sense, down to probably pennies, whether or not a product that does that thing for that customer can be sold at that price point, which is invaluable at the beginning or the early days. So when we look to invest in our accelerator programs or our accelerator teams, we're actively engaging our distribution networks. Just so happens that a lot of multinationals are a part of that. Now, on the other side, you were talking about, why maybe these things fail. And ultimately speaking, all jokes aside, although I do love going in and bashing corporates, it's one of my favorite keynote is, just kind of rile up corporates and tell them how they're all going to fail. But it's one of those things that it's a cultural thing. And what makes you big by definition doesn't allow you to be small and agile. And I always say this because I worked at Apple for 6 years, so I feel pretty confident. Even just this morning, you saw they acquired Bedit, which isn't an obvious acquisition. It's something they could easily have done themselves. But Apple and Google are averaging, I always ask people, are you more innovative than Apple or Google? Very few corporates are going to have the gall to raise their hand and say yes. So let's say you aren't or don't think you are. Well, they are acquiring businesses on the pace of about one per week. It's insane. And so if you think about how challenging it is to stay on the cusp of innovation, especially based on how quickly these revolutions have been breaking down, it used to be 1,000 years and it's 100 years. Now it's almost inter-year. We're seeing revolutions completely transform the way we have to build our businesses. It's pretty obvious that corporations or multinationals are going to have a hard time doing that from within. However, we do think you have to focus on entrepreneurship and evolving the internal talent and utilizing the resources and the culture you do have. And frankly speaking, throwing up a corporate or multinational accelerator program, which we see all over the world, and like you said, the hit rates are very low, I think is probably one of the least effective ways to actually instill or buy or maybe even merge into the kind of innovation pipeline or channel that you want to eventually get your company into. It's fairly it's pretty much a PR and marketing stunt, just to be frank. And I very rarely have seen that work well.
Let's move on now to the accelerator. So this is where we're taking an idea past the ideation spades. This is where I imagine you're starting to get a lot more engaged with the individual company, starting to put more resources into helping them develop prototypes, think out the business model. How does this work for you? Is this a biannual program? Is it a rolling basis? Is there a fixed start stop, or is it need based? What does this look like in practical terms for you?
Yeah, we've tried just about everything. I think we thought we knew some things, having worked with accelerators and done this quite a few times, especially Hillary's background at Seed Camp. However, where we are today is we think our best offer ever, and there's two ways. There's a horizontal and a vertical. So the horizontal programs are global and distributed, and those are generally going to be very small cohorts that we run. We're actually about to announce new applications at the end of the month, where we'll start in the early fall with the next group. But we are not averse to taking deals between cohorts. That is absolutely possible. We've done it many times. So we never want to say that you can't join. Like that's crazy, right? Like you are where you are, you have a good idea, and we're happy to work with great founders at whatever stage they're ready and we're ready. So we can definitely do a deal between the different cohorts. Right now, those are generally running about 2 to 3 times a year on the horizontal basis, and we can do those completely distributed. We've been documenting and creating a process that allows us to support, train, develop entrepreneurs that are doing, basic IoT technologies anywhere in the world. You name it, we've probably done it. We've got teams in India, Kazakhstan, Russia, the UK, the US, Canada. It's really all over the place. And so we feel very confident in doing that. Now, the other side that we've started working on is the vertical programs. So our first that we've announced, I wish I could talk about some of the others, but I'll have to wait and find out later. But the one that we can talk about now is our vertical drone program. So we saw that the drone technology had really evolved quite rapidly. It was maturing faster than people were giving it credit for throughout the application with a partner in Spain called Incubio. So we do an online and then offline program. We're actually just about to wrap the first cohort there, but we've got 3 teams already signed up. We had, I think, 15 start, and we slowly have weeded them out over time. And this is a really great process for the founder because they're not giving anything up. There's no equity exchange until which point we decide to make the final investment. So it allows them to sign up, really learn a lot, go through some process, whittle down work on their ideas, refine it, get some help, and then ultimately we'll make the investments in the teams that we see are the best towards the end of that program. So we're trying to always add value, even if we don't end up making the investment.
What is the end goal for the end of this accelerator? Is it fair to say it's prototype and business model? Where do you say that a company has passed through?
I think the better way to frame it, just because we create custom programs for every single founder that joins us, so we go as fast as they can go. But one thing to know is that we will not accept a founder or an application, or at least we won't review them. We'll probably talk to them in a different capacity if we're excited about the idea. But we won't accept them to the accelerator if they've already launched. And that's really important because we found, and trust me, we've tried and failed at this, we've really tried to help founders post-launch fix some of those mistakes that they've made before they launched. The challenge is, and rightfully so, that once you've launched, and if it's on crowdfunding, God forbid, you have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of orders, or if it's a pilot program with a big corporate and you have a pilot program that's going to need to be launched in 8 months or 12 months or whatever, unfortunately, the founder's head or the teams have to get into a complete gear around delivery only, almost exclusively. So they really can't focus on fixing the nice to haves or the things that we wish we could have caught during the accelerator program. We've tried it. It's not a good use of our time or the founder's time. Once you made a promise, you better deliver. So we think it's better that you focus on working with our studio, where we can actually help do the manufacturing, design work, cost downs, all the kind of work you have to do in China. But we have seen teams go all the way to launching their products. We've seen teams go all the way to getting pilot programs signed. We just had a couple of really awesome pilots signed out of our, no pun intended, but out of our drone programs. We've had teams that have gotten just to validating the concept, and that's totally fine. They then have to go deal with all the launching and prototyping and everything later. So it's really up to them. We make as much progress as is humanly possible during that 4-month period.
Yeah, and I think I'd rushed on a little bit too quickly there, actually. You said that you whittled it down from about 15 to 3 companies that you ended up investing in through the last batch. What was the process there? What determined the decision to invest in these 3?
Sure. So really, we do this in all of our programs. That particular example and those data points of 15 to 3, actually it was 100, then 15, then 3. But either way, that was for the drone program specifically. But we generally do the same thing in our horizontal and global IoT accelerators as well. We will take X teams, and then we will whittle those down throughout the first month of the program, and then only end up investing in a few of them. And there's no set number. Like, we're not trying to say 50% make it or 10% make it or whatever. It's not really the point. Frankly speaking, there's no investor in the world that actually knows what they're doing that's going to tell you that we have some magic, 8 ball that knows what's right and wrong. We have a pretty standard rubric that we created that we've been running all of our teams through. We've obviously refined that over the last 2.5 years. And God, we've had over 1,000 applications. We have tried our best to kind of foresee that future, but I can tell you a couple of things that we've seen that consistently win in terms of our opinion. The first one is around founders that understand the long game. I'm always impressed, and I think the majority of us are impressed, where founders can sort of play out the entire chess game in their head and recognize where the parts of that strategy or the game you're about to play that you're going to deploy that have to go right, or that you have to control for now, that are going to give you that chance of winning. Because not only is it challenging to win in the physical world just generally, but when you launch that website, when you do that pilot program, when the first PR announcement goes out, whatever happens, crowdfunding, etc., you are now competing with the biggest of big players in the world. You are literally competing with every single large MNC, manufacturer, electronics maker, everyone simultaneously, like the second they even know you exist. So it's really important for us, for a founder, to be able to see long. Most founders come in, and this is not a dig on those founders. I think it's just very challenging to think like this. But a lot of founders come in and they're focused on the prototype and the crowdfunding. They can't really think longer than that. And if they have, it generally sounds like something you read off like a VC blog or like TechCrunch. It's like, I'm going to make money on my data, and I'm going to sell through blah, blah, blah retail channels. And you're like, okay, great. Like, can you walk me through what's different? Can you actually tell me how you're going to have a competitive advantage? So generally thinking really long is something we look for in founders. And then another one is coachability. And it might seem, I hope that doesn't sound demeaning, but it's true. The physical world is relentless. It really doesn't care about you. The digital world, you can bend to your sort of opinions and desires a lot better than the physical world. I mean, seriously, I always laughed. And we're like, essentially you're challenging physics like all day long. And the physical world works a certain way. And not to say you can't do a little bit of creativity there, but ultimately when we meet founders that come in with super, super strong beliefs and are unwilling to budge, it is good to be determined, but it's also another thing to challenge our head of hardware or our partners at Foxconn or our distribution channels that have been doing this for hundreds of years. And I think that's really critical, not just in probably hardware, but any person that's looking to get investment from someone. Generally be open-minded and listen to the feedback. Otherwise, why are you taking their money or joining their accelerator?
Interesting insight that you're looking for long-term. I agree. A lot of companies, I'm certainly very guilty of this, just trying to survive in the short term. But of course, that's not enough to build up a business. That's maybe just enough to make it through the next year. Your investments, are we a USD fund, USB, RMB? What is your investment vehicle?
So the first 3 years in operation, it's actually been myself and my two co-founders self-funding. So this is probably the biggest differentiator, period, is that we do not have LPs. And the reason I bring that up is the game in the physical world of IoT is specifically in the last 3 to 4 years is dramatically different than it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And so we think that our largest competitive advantage is our flexibility because we don't report to anyone. Now, that's not to say that we won't raise a fund or that we won't actually, take on multinationals or corporations that want to put money into teams and help them get larger checks. Of course, on average, I think our teams are now raising 1.7 million per team, which has been great, during our programs. But I think that it's more interesting from our perspective to be as flexible and dynamic as possible because every single jurisdiction is different. Like I said, we have 12 or might be 13 different countries that we hold positions and investments in right now. And we highly expect that will continue to grow. So it could be in magnitude of over 100 at some point. So most of our teams right now are coming from Europe. That's not to say that's by definition what we want to do. It just so happens to have happened that way. I think Europe is highly undervalued right now in terms of the talent ratio compared to the States. But overall, we've just been investing off of our books. We're a corporation legally. We are not a partnership like most VC funds are.
Are you also then building revenue models into these where you're providing services to companies that need support scaling up manufacturing, for example?
Yeah, 1,000%. That's probably the good transition because, let's just be frank about it. Our early portfolio needed the help. We've been in China for 75 years. We have shipped literally, I think it's over $500 million in products. Like we know what we're doing in China. That's not the problem. But our founders, no matter what we gave them in terms of educational materials, with Enter China or our own hands-on support or the partners that we work with in China, they're still making mistakes. And that's not just our portfolio. I can tell you, although I won't use names, I can tell you dozens, literally dozens of teams that have come to China either through referrals and friendships from the Bay Area, New York, London, wherever, with millions of dollars in investment that have walked out bankrupt and never shipped a product. And to us, that's just not okay. And that's not something to sit back and, go, oh, we told you so. That's the last thing I want to ever say. I want to make sure everyone ships their product. And so we offer these studio services more out of necessity than, it makes us a ton of cash. Trust me, operations in China don't make a ton of cash. But I think it's really important that we can help them rely on the systems in China and use China for what it's absolutely the best in the world at. And that's making these high volume, low cost products that still have amazingly high quality. And that's what, the West really wants, and especially what a founder of a small company or a startup needs. So that service arm of our business absolutely is a way that we help fund the operations of the company. And obviously there's others like you talked about, Enter China and our distribution studio.
Go into a bit more detail here. What are you doing with the China studio? And in particular, what are the challenges that you see companies run into, whether it's on the cost side, the quality side, partner stability? What tends to be the points that could potentially challenge a company and push them into bankruptcy if they make a mistake?
So we look at every single founder as where they are. It's actually one of my personal sort of life practices is just being in beta. That's why my whole name online is Beta Bay. It's look, we talk to founders like, look, you are where you are. You don't have to sell us. Like, we're here to help. Like you can't tell me you're ready to manufacture if you can't send me the 13 files you need to go to manufacturing. It's just how it works. Like you can't do the RFQ process. And if you're talking to someone, you're asking them questions that they're telling you answers to that are not founded on the reality of the situation. They're going to give you a quote or a price or say yes to something that they can't do because they actually don't have the files or input they need. So we've created, just like all of the four main buckets of our life cycle for Brinc, Enter China, our Accelerator, our studio, and our distribution arm, we created our studio exactly the same. We just stratified the offer based on the life cycle. So we start early in risk analysis. We have plenty of people that come to us and say, hey, I've got this idea. How do you think I should approach this? What are the pros and cons? And we'll do an engineering risk analysis, walking them through the approach, the existing technologies, really, really easy, really quick and dirty work, but we can do it for a low price and gives them enough insight to feel confident of the risk that they're taking on. And we move all the way into the early stage PRD, or the product requirements definition, where you actually have to create the documentation to move into R&D. Now, the reason I'm laying this out, and everyone can check this out on our website at any point, just brinc.io/services. It's laid out literally in order because there is a process that you have to go through for creating physical products. Now, I think one of the challenges that we've all seen is that the maker movement, which is critical to the innovators and all the inspiration and building these companies, has, however, made people feel like they can short circuit the process of developing something at scale. You can make 100 pieces of something. You can make 1,000 in your garage with your friends if you put your mind to it. Like one of my buddies, Eric, the founder of Pebble, he made his first 1,500 in his garage with his friends. Like, that's possible. It's just not scalable. And you still have to finish the R&D process and the files that are required to go to manufacturing. So we actually will help the entire process, where we'll oversee the work. If it's your team or other engineering firms, which are our friends, we'll do the work. If that's, let's say, the bill of material cost downs, like you said earlier, I love this idea of teams come to us with these assumptions of their bill of materials from DigiKey and Mouser and Alibaba, and they're 100% wrong every time. And that's fine, because guess what? That's how people make money, and that's fine. But it's not my job to make those guys money. My job is to save founders money. So, even just something basic like having our team in China call the supplier in China can save you sometimes dollars on a BOM, which can be crazy from a profit perspective. And any founder that tells you that 5% reduction or 10% reduction in their BOM is not that important right now doesn't understand how to build a physical company. So we'll do that work early. And then when they do decide to come to China to actually source and oversee the manufacturing, we'll go do that whole process with them. And our whole opinion is we want them to learn. I do not want any founder, even if they have equity in our company, I have zero desire to have a founder come back to me year after year after year, product after product after product, period. We do want the world to learn how to do this. We want to swim upstream and see these problems go away. But in the meantime, we do know that the founders need to sit by an expert. They need to learn this process so they can actually do it right the first time, because you generally don't get second chances in your first hardware business. And then you can decide with more information what to take in-house over time.
What about the capital issue? So scaling up manufacturing. I think a lot of hardware founders underestimate the amount of capital that they're going to require in order to get a product manufactured in scale, and also then to take it that next step through distribution. How active are you in evaluating or supporting capital raises? And how do you evaluate the amount of capital that's going to be required?
Yes, unfortunately, that's pretty much 1,000% the case. So very rarely do I have a team show up going, hey, I've got way too much money on my hands. Like, how do I do China correctly? Unfortunately, most teams don't really know. And that's not because anyone is stupid or is doing it maliciously. I always just say that, generally speaking, people just don't know this stuff. I didn't know this stuff when I lived in San Francisco. There's no way this information is common knowledge. So the thing that we usually do is we'll have them go through our early evaluation process, which is always free. We have them fill out some information so we can get a better sense of the current technologies. Frankly speaking, most aspects of production are not custom. You look at the types of materials, you look at the sensors, the features, the yields required, the materials, just kind of basic stuff. And you get a sense of like, okay, like we feel comfortable within this range, you're going to be okay. We've done our best to sort of break that down by where they are. And we always are upfront about that, because the problem with China, as most people know, is that people will just tell you yes all the time. Just a cultural thing. Yes, yes, yes. And that's a challenge because you rely on that information. So our job is to create the most trustworthy and transparent information that comes out of China, so you can actually build the right product with the right price the first time. We're actually going to be announcing a free tool in a few weeks that will help every founder that does a physical product completely for free better plan their cash flows. We've created a tool that we're going to give away to everyone, and we'll announce that in a few weeks.
Can we dig into a couple examples here? Maybe Soundbreamer and Pill Drill, or if there's others, or if you want to anonymize them, that's fine. But just give us a couple hard examples. How much capital was required to get a particular product through the manufacturing stage and then through distribution?
Absolutely. So this is obviously going to be very different for a B2B product that has no requirement to have nice packaging or consumer ad spend or anything else. That's a very different conversation, because unfortunately a lot of the pricing goes into design stuff that the end user would normally see and feel every day, versus a sensor you send in a pack of 1,000 to a warehouse or somewhere. But from the consumer side, we've seen the scrappiest teams, like the very cheapest we've ever seen it, is in that 250 to 300,000 USD range. Now that's for scale too, like that's thousands of pieces, right? That's not a couple hundred. That's probably around the 3,000 to 5,000 piece range. Now that's cheap. I mean, that is not simple. We've seen, that team was just so militant and not spending money, but it worked out for them. Now they're, shipping all over the planet and have some of the largest retailers in the world stocking their products. Now, on the other hand, we do see that teams that come in with that 500, 750 or $1 million have plenty of breathing room to do stuff correctly. Now, the challenge that I'm finding though, is that when people think they have cash, they get a little lazy. And that's generally, if you haven't done physical before, if you've done a physical product, even if it wasn't connected, you generally understand kind of the gotchas or the kind of landmines throughout the process. But I think that most digital founders or first-time founders, when they think they kind of have some breathing room, they don't really give the physical world, the credit required for how much money is going to kind of slip away through the system, and defects and returns and customer service and the lifetime cost of that product, or whatever happens, getting stuff stuck in Border Patrol for tariffs and taxes, and you name it, it happens.
Gotcha. So it's sounding like somewhere in that maybe $400,000 to $800,000 range for a typical consumer product to get the first batch of mass production out. Last point here then is distribution and sales. This can be another cash drain for a consumer company, but also for a B2B. Maybe on a different side, you need the right people, and the right people are not cheap to sell through a B2B environment. What does this look like? Is this still through the China studio? Is this a different way to engage with companies?
Yep. So one of my two co-founders, Bashar, his family, originally from the Middle East, but they've been in China for 25 years doing trade and distribution, everything from electronics to fabrics. I mean, they've done PE funds for real estate, you name it, they've done it. So we've built a pretty solid distribution channel through his family's relationships, and obviously over the last 3 years that we've been building Brinc. So that's generally an arm's length transaction. Two main things that we get kind of excited about there. The first is when we look at a team, we generally get excited about the opportunity on the business side. Like I often tell teams that join our studio that I'm already in my head pre-selling that product. And so, the kind of best way to have a relationship with any startup is, hey, I know a way to make you money. And that's sort of the nicest way to engage. But a lot of the teams, unfortunately, can't handle the pressure. Their supply chain would generally crumble, or they don't have the internal operations built to service larger customers. So we generally will do basic success fee type distribution work. That's how most distributors work. If a distributor is having you pay them money, you're in the wrong relationship. And on the other side, we look at trade financing, which is really awesome, because if you get an order for 5,000 pieces, this can be B2B or B2B2C, it doesn't matter, or directly B2C. If you have a qualified buyer on the other end, we actually will triangulate that debt and do the trade financing as well. Obviously, it's not a guarantee. It's highly discretionary, but we have essentially unlimited debt available based on our historical businesses in China, where if someone comes to us saying, I've got a 100,000 piece order for X B2B contract, and I can't, float that money, or a bank won't give it to me, or the rate of the bank's too high, ... We're very happy to look at that, because those are generally the kind of challenges teams will find during the scaling in the physical world.
Gotcha. I love your flexibility and the practical approach you have to basically identifying pain points and then finding a solution, whether in-house, external. One challenge that my partners remind me that I face constantly is kind of scope creep in terms of ambition. So identifying a new market, a new opportunity, deciding to put together a marketing approach, chasing it. I think this is a challenge also for hardware companies that look at the global landscape and believe that they have a more or less horizontal solution that can apply to customers in a vast array of markets. But of course, that's extremely expensive. How active are you in helping companies to target markets? What do you think is the right approach in terms of the right amount of focus on a core market, a beachhead before expanding?
Okay, so you're referencing teams that are post-manufacturing and they have samples now and they're just looking to ship. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Got it. So from that point, because let's say if they came through our Accelerator program and we have equity in that team, just being honest, obviously a team that you're an owner in, you're going to probably put a little extra elbow grease in. But we've also trained those teams. We found that the teams that go through our accelerators generally are the easiest teams through our studio and our distribution arms because we train them right the first time. So when we bring in teams that come through the studio and they're ready to distribute now, it's really up to them, but we will give them the advice. Every deal's a little different, and we generally will give them amazing, support. Like, the founder of Pebble, Eric, is a friend, or Misfit, Sunny Vu is also a friend. We will sit them down with people and actually kind of laser focus in this conversation because we're not the smartest people in the room. We want to scale and we want to sell product too. But sometimes that's the wrong decision. I think focusing is the only thing that's in your control at the beginning because once your product gets out there, if it's doing what it's supposed to do well, it's going to naturally grow and the opportunities will kind of come on their own. But I think it's really critical for any team to make sure that you have enough internal operational support, a little bit of that kind of focus on operational excellence before you start scaling. And that could be geographic. It could be volume. Because once you kind of like the cat's out of the bag kind of thing, it's sort of hard to go back. So I think a lot of founders that you talk to say, ooh, like maybe I wouldn't have done all 400 stores in that retail chain. Maybe I would have done 20 to start. Or maybe I would have focused on English-speaking countries versus bringing in 30 different languages. Or maybe in my crowdfunding campaign, when I took orders from 130 countries, I should have limited that. So I think there's a lot of regret from founders that didn't focus early because you can always go there later, but it's really hard to stop it once you've started it.
A couple wrap-up questions. First, what do you have in the pipeline?
Oh, I love these questions. So I'd say the first thing to look out for is probably new geographies and potentially a couple of new products that we're going to give away for free and services. So I think a lot of people that have been following us have seen a pretty explosive 2017 for us. Not just to mention the drone programs, a new batch to the Global IoT Accelerator, acquiring Enter China, launching our Middle Eastern location. There will be more announcements to come, but I think in those particular areas you should watch out.
Can you point out one or two, it could be startups, could be other types of organizations that you think people should be aware of, companies that are outside of your sphere, but you just think are awesome companies doing great things, maybe a bit under the radar and people need to be aware of what they're doing?
Interesting. So, I think there's a couple of things. Things that I'm currently excited about that may not just be IoT specific. I am super active and loving this new platform called Ask Whale. It's by Justin Kahn, obviously Twitch and Justin TV, Y Combinator, etc. Only because it's been a way for me to support giving things that I've learned away to the world at scale without the kind of one-on-one requirements of a WeChat message or a Facebook message or an email, which obviously every person that's got had a mentor, been given advice by someone would like to help others. But it's very hard to scale your time. The busier you get, generally the more the busier you get. So it's like you have more to give, but you have less time to do so. So I've been really loving investing some energy and my knowledge and help by answering questions on Ask Whale. I also think that there's some really cool stuff coming out of the investment community right now. And that's not to say that, I agree with all of it, but I do think that I don't know if I could point to one particular fund, but I can tell you one thing that I've seen as a trend is flexibility. And I think that that's something that's really exciting. I think that a lot of founders right now are kind of programmed, as we all are, through TechCrunch and Crunchbase and AngelList and all the VCs and all the accelerators that are the most famous in the world, there's sort of like a programmatic way or some sort of tribal knowledge that we've all sort of decided is correct to how we build these new innovative companies. And I think we're seeing that break down. And I think that's really positive. Not saying it's that, VCs are going away or the Valley's not going to be relevant, but I mean that I think you can be a lot more creative now than you could be just 5 years ago. I think that the normal economics and business models are changing, and that VCs and corporates and governments and manufacturers and distributors and angel investors are being quite creative right now. So I'm seeing some awesome new ways. I mean, crowdfunding probably, or equity crowdfunding plus normal crowdfunding pre-orders are two obvious things that have changed in the short term. But I think if you dig under the hood a little bit, you'll see some really cool ways to finance your company, grow your company in ways that maybe we didn't imagine were possible in the last 10 years.
Last question, Bay. Who should get in touch with you, and how can they reach out to you? How can they learn more about Brinc?
So about Brinc, it's very simple. Feel free to go to just Brinc with a C.io. Would love to have you join the mailing list, but also everything that we possibly can tell people is on our website. So feel free to dig through. Me personally, I'm incredibly approachable. I always say to people, you might be surprised how much time I'll give you. I just need people to do it in a format that makes it easy for me. So generally Twitter, which is at Betabay, BETABAY. You'll also see on my Twitter profile is my link to my Ask Whale, where feel free to ask me questions, guys. I answer nearly 100% of the questions that I get asked, and I'm on the free tier, so no one has to pay me for that. I want to help and provide as much insight as I possibly can. Those are two of the best ways, but obviously if you can find me on the internet, feel free to hit me up, but I generally prioritize Twitter and then Ask Whale.
Bay, thanks so much for your time. For me, really educational conversation, so I really appreciate you taking the time and sitting down to talk with us.
This has been a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. We help to accelerate digital transformation by advising business leaders on how to integrate IoT technologies into their operations and products. We appreciate your thoughts, suggestions, and of course your reviews. And if you have an interesting project, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. You can write me at eric.walenza@iot1.com.